Across the United States, Britain, and Canada, something is changing. People are becoming increasingly frustrated with politics. They are angry about the cost of living. They are worried about housing. They are waiting longer for healthcare. They are questioning immigration policies. They are watching governments spend billions on wars and defense while ordinary families struggle to pay their bills. And, perhaps most importantly, they are beginning to ask a very simple question. Is government actually working for us? From Donald Trump's America, to a changing political landscape in Britain, to Mark Carney's Canada, the political leadership may be different. The parties may be different. The policies may be different. But the public frustration has something in common. A growing number of people feel that politicians make promises during elections, but once they are in power, ordinary citizens are left waiting. So, why is trust in government under pressure? Is it because politicians have failed to deliver? Is it because the economy is failing ordinary people? Or has the political system itself become disconnected from the public? Today, we look at the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada, and ask, why are people losing faith in their governments? Let's start with America. Donald Trump returned to the White House promising to shake up Washington. His message was simple: America first, lower costs, stronger borders, more jobs, and a stronger economy. But there's a problem. For millions of Americans, political slogans don't pay the grocery bill. They don't reduce rent. They don't make healthcare affordable. And they don't necessarily make life feel more secure. A May 2026 Reuters Ipsos poll found that 74% of Americans said their cost of living was on the wrong track, while 73% disapproved of Trump's handling of the issue. That tells us something important. For voters, economic performance is increasingly personal. It is not about GDP figures. It is about what happens when someone walks into a supermarket, what happens when they receive their electricity bill, what happens when they renew their rent, or when they try to pay for medical treatment. And this is where the disconnect begins. Governments can point to economic statistics. They can talk about investment. They can announce new trade deals. They can celebrate stock market performance. But ordinary people may still feel poor. And when that happens, trust begins to disappear. Trump's political brand has always been built around the idea that he is an outsider, someone who can break through Washington's political establishment. But being an outsider creates a new expectation. People expect results, fast results. And if prices remain high, if healthcare remains expensive, if housing remains out of reach, then the question becomes, how long can voters continue to believe that change is coming? This is the central challenge for Trump's political movement, because frustration with government helped bring Trump back to power. But that same frustration can eventually turn against him. There is another reason trust is falling. Politics has become more divided. In America, almost every major issue has become a political battlefield. Immigration, abortion, healthcare, climate change, gun rights, foreign policy, even basic questions about democracy and elections. Instead of bringing people together, politics often pushes people further apart. And social media has made the situation even more intense. People increasingly live inside political bubbles. They watch different news. They follow different influencers. They believe different versions of reality. And governments are often blamed for making these divisions worse. But here is the uncomfortable question. Is the government responsible for political polarization? Or is the public itself demanding more polarization? Because politicians follow voters. And politicians understand that anger gets attention. Fear gets clicks. Outrage gets donations. And division can win elections. The result? A political system that increasingly rewards conflict instead of compromise. And when people see politicians fighting constantly, while their own problems remain unsolved, they begin to lose faith in the entire system. Now, let's cross the Atlantic. Britain has its own crisis of confidence. For years, British voters have watched governments come and go. Conservatives, Labour, new leaders, new promises, new economic plans. But for many people, the underlying problems remain: the cost of living, housing, the NHS, low economic growth, immigration, and public services under pressure. The latest data from Britain's Office for National Statistics shows just how central these concerns have become. In May 2026, 89% of adults identified the cost of living as an important issue. 80% pointed to the NHS, and 72% highlighted the economy. These are not abstract political debates. These are everyday concerns. And this is where Britain's political crisis begins. People are not necessarily asking for radical politics. Many simply want government to work. They want to see a doctor. They want affordable housing. They want decent public transport. They want wages that keep up with prices. And they want to believe that the next government will actually be better than the last one. But after years of political instability, that faith has been weakened. Britain's political landscape is now increasingly fragmented. Traditional party loyalties are weakening. New political movements are gaining attention. And voters are becoming more willing to punish governments they believe have failed. The message is clear. You promised change. Where is it? And now Britain has entered another political chapter. Andy Burnham has become Prime Minister. His arrival has created renewed interest in the possibility of political change. Recent polling has shown an early boost for Labour following Burnham's arrival, although it is far too early to know whether that momentum will last. But Burnham now faces a huge challenge, because the public is not simply looking for a new face. They are looking for results. The cost of living, the NHS, social care, housing, regional inequality. These are problems that cannot be solved with speeches. They require money, long-term planning, and difficult political decisions. Burnham's early moves have focused attention on cost of living pressures and public services. But the real test will come later. Can he deliver? Because this is the lesson from the politics of the last decade. When governments promise too much and deliver too little, the public becomes cynical. And once cynicism takes hold, it is very difficult to reverse. Now, Canada. For years, Canada was seen as one of the world's most stable democracies, a country associated with moderation, tolerance, strong institutions, and relatively high public trust. But that image is under pressure. One of the biggest reasons? Housing. For younger Canadians especially, the dream of owning a home increasingly feels out of reach. And when people work hard, pay taxes, and still cannot afford a place to live, they start asking, who is responsible? The federal government? Provincial governments? Municipal governments? Developers? Immigration policy? Or all of the above? The answer is complicated. But voters rarely experience politics as a complicated policy equation. They experience it as a monthly rent payment, a mortgage they cannot afford, or a house they cannot buy. And this is where trust becomes fragile. Canada's immigration debate has also become increasingly intense. For years, immigration was presented as an economic necessity. More workers, more talent, more population growth. But when population growth happens faster than housing and infrastructure can keep up, the political conversation changes. People start asking, are governments planning properly? Are there enough homes? Are healthcare systems prepared? Are public services keeping pace? And this is an important distinction. The debate is not simply about immigration. It is about whether governments have managed the consequences of their policies. Because when people cannot find affordable housing, when healthcare access becomes difficult, or when infrastructure feels overwhelmed, they begin to question the people making the decisions. The danger for politicians is that frustration can quickly become anger, and anger creates political opportunity. So, what connects America, Britain, and Canada? The answer may be simple. The cost of living. Different countries, different political systems, different leaders, but the same basic problem. People feel that their incomes are not keeping pace with the cost of living. And when that happens, trust in government suffers. Because governments are judged by outcomes, not intentions. A politician can say, the economy is strong, but a family may say, my bills are still too high. A government can announce, housing construction is increasing, but a young person may say, I still can't afford a home. A leader can promise, the NHS will improve, but a patient may say, I've been waiting months for treatment. This is the great political disconnect. The government speaks in statistics. The public speaks in experiences. And when those two realities don't match, trust collapses. But perhaps there is a deeper problem. Governments today face challenges that are much bigger than any single election cycle. Climate change, artificial intelligence, global conflicts, economic inequality, migration, housing shortages, aging populations, and rising public debt. Yet politicians still operate on 4-year or 5-year election cycles. That creates a fundamental contradiction. The public wants immediate solutions, but many problems require decades, and politicians know that. So instead of making difficult long-term decisions, they may choose short-term solutions. Something that looks good before the next election. Something that produces a headline. Something that can be announced at a press conference. But not necessarily something that solves the underlying problem. And voters are becoming increasingly aware of this. They are asking, are politicians solving problems? Or simply managing headlines? This frustration has created an opportunity for anti-establishment politics. The message is powerful. The system is broken. The elites don't understand you. The politicians have failed. And only an outsider can fix it. We've seen versions of this message across the Western world. And it works because it speaks directly to frustration. But there is a catch. Once outsiders become insiders, they inherit the same problems, the same institutions, the same bureaucracy, the same economic pressures, and the same public expectations. This creates a cycle. People lose faith in traditional politicians. They elect outsiders. The outsiders fail to solve every problem. And then voters become even more frustrated. So they look for someone new. And the cycle starts again. So, can trust in government be restored? Yes, but not through slogans, not through social media posts, and not through political theater. Trust has to be earned, and that means governments need to deliver visible results. Affordable housing, better healthcare, lower financial pressure, reliable public services, transparent decision-making, and perhaps most importantly, accountability. When politicians make promises, people need to see consequences when those promises are broken. Because democracy is not just about voting. It is about trust. Citizens agree to give governments power in exchange for the expectation that governments will use that power responsibly. When that agreement breaks down, the entire political system becomes vulnerable. So, are people losing faith in government? The answer appears to be yes. But perhaps the bigger question is, why? The answer is not simply Donald Trump. It is not simply the British government. And it is not simply Canada's political leadership. The deeper problem is that millions of people feel disconnected from the political system itself. They feel that their problems are not being solved, that their voices are not being heard, and that politicians are more interested in winning the next election than fixing the problems that will still exist after it. In America, the question is whether economic frustration will reshape Trump's political future. In Britain, the question is whether a new leader can actually restore confidence in government. And in Canada, the question is whether housing, immigration, and affordability will continue to dominate the political conversation. But across all three countries, one thing is clear. People are becoming less willing to accept promises without results. And that could change politics for years to come. Because when people stop believing that government can solve their problems, they don't necessarily stop caring about politics. They become more angry, more skeptical, and sometimes more willing to support anyone who promises to tear the system down. The real challenge for governments is therefore not just winning elections. It is rebuilding trust. And that may be the hardest political battle of all. On-screen text. When people lose faith in government, what happens next? End plate. What do you think? Are people losing faith in government because politicians are failing? Or because expectations have become impossible to meet? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.